Reckless 2.0. Here with Vickiss and D-Train. Are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yes. How's it going, sir? Some technical difficulties at the beginning, but we got through it.
We got through it. Still learning, sir. Still learning. How are you?
The same. Still learning and definitely trying to survive this plantation.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Kind of crazy out here.
It's kind of racist out there, too. But, yeah, what can you do? But, yes, very crazy as well. I guess, any housekeeping before we go to today's guest, Mr. Scot Nakagawa?
I think I'm good. I got a couple of housekeeping things out if you guys, listeners, caught our LEAP program on Saturday. So I think I'm good. If you don't have anything, we can get right to it.
Okay. Yes, today's guest on Reckless 2.0 will be Mr. Scot Nakagawa. He's a non-white male, and he, I guess, is a senior partner at ChangeLab. And he has been dedicated to addressing racism. So I guess we'll go in deeper. Anything else, D-Train?
No, sir.
Okay.
We're good.
All right. Dialing him now.
Hello.
Hey, Mr. Nakagawa?
Yes.
Hey, this is D-Train from Reckless. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Yes. Hi. And this is Vickiss, co-host. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Yes. Hi.
Hi. How are you doing?
Well as I can be.
Okay, so Mr. Nakagawa, if there's anything that you want to tell our listening audience, if they haven't seen the blog, if they don't know about your work at ChangeLab, just anything you want to tell the audience about yourself, feel free to go on ahead and before we get started.
Okay. Well, my name is Scot Nakagawa. I'm a racial justice advocate. I've been involved in racial justice advocacy for about 30 years. I'm also a senior partner in a firm called ChangeLab. And ChangeLab is a grassroots racial justice think tank that's based in Seattle and New York. And the firm focuses on research and education for racial justice with a primary focus on providing resource materials and tools to Asian American progressives who are advocating for racial equity. I also have a blog site that I've been working on for about a month now called RaceFiles. I think that's what got the attention of this program. And that blog is an attempt to try to address racial justice issues in social media, to start to break down some of the kinds of ideas and tropes and present some kind of analysis that we feel like might be useful or important to racial justice advocates who are grappling with difficult issues of race in communities that they're organizing and are trying to develop a sort of message campaign to unify people who are behind racial justice under a kind of more cohesive analysis. So that's primarily what I've been involved in.
Alrighty. And I guess before I have some questions based on that. Well, actually, let me ask this first question because I'm really interested in this term think tank. When you say think tank, do you think of a tank like a fish tank in an aquarium, or do you think of a tank like a military vehicle?
Well, neither of those things, actually. What we are doing is basically working with people who are involved in racial justice advocacy and kind of collecting them in order to give them opportunities to develop ideas that might make their work more effective. So I guess tank is probably the bad word to use. It's a little bit confusing. We think of the convenings we do as thought labs. And that's in ChangeLab. We think of ourselves as kind of a laboratory for cooking up new ideas about how to promote racial justice.
Yes, sir. And I guess for the listening audience, you are a non-white male, correct?
That's right. I am a non-white male. I'm an Asian American man.
Yes, sir. Okay, so here on Reckless 2.0, we've unfortunately surmised that we are in a global system of white supremacy, racism, and that is defined as follows: global system of people who classify themselves as white, who maintain, refine, expand dominance over all people who they classify as non-white. Do you agree that such a system exists?
Yeah, we absolutely do agree that such a system exists. I think that, what probably got your attention was a particular post I wrote called Blackness Is the Fulcrum. I think it sort of made the rounds and got circulated in a number of places under a different title. I think it was something like Why I, as an Asian Man, Oppose Anti-Black Racism. But the whole premise of the post is that we live in a system of white supremacy, and that in that system of white supremacy, that anti-black racism is the fulcrum that gives white supremacy leverage. So by fulcrum, what I mean is that thing, like a jack, like if you think of the lever as, as a pry bar. In order for the pry bar to have any kind of real power, you need a rock or some other thing to make it work like a seesaw so that you can actually amplify the amount of power you can exercise by using that bar. That particular idea seems to have interested people and has caused a certain amount of dialogue to develop around that particular post. But, basically the premise is that we live in a system of white supremacy, and that system affects all of us as people of color, regardless of our race. All non-white people are negatively affected by that system. But what makes that system so potent and so powerful, particularly here in the United States, is anti-black racism in particular.
For sure. I couldn't agree more.
Interesting. I would just like to point out I just think it's interesting using it was an interesting choice of words, the fulcrum, in that just black people being seen as an object, a thing to use to get to a means. Just think it's very interesting very interesting and accurate use of words.
Well, it's a sad, part of our history, and really a sad part of present-day life in the United States, that black people are in fact objectified, and really are used to propel an agenda of economic inequality and social inequality in general here in the United States. And in particular, I think that the sentiment that allows that to, be so potent, that gives it that potency, is anti-black racism. It really does seem to drive politics in the United States and has caused a world of pain for all sorts of people, including people who aren't African American. And I think therein lies the irony and the reason I wrote the post.
Yes, sir. I wanted to ask you, because I think you bring up a very good point, because, well, if we take the United States out of the equation, non-white people, I guess, who white people would say are not white, make up about 9/10 of the population of the planet. And I definitely think that by bashing on black people and other sort of indigenous people, that I definitely think that's how white supremacy really exercises its power and flexes its muscle. And one example of this, I don't know if you've ever heard of this website. It's called Chimp Out. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this website. It's basically a white supremacist website that invites non-white people who aren't black onto the website. And, they pretty much just have a good time bashing black people. And what's interesting about the site is I've looked on the site, and, some of the white people on the site are, expressing pretty much blatantly, white supremacist views. Like, and when I say white, obviously, bashing on black people is white supremacist, but showing that they don't have too much esteem for these other non-white people either. But it seems that the people who say they're non-white on this site don't seem to notice because they're too busy, I guess, in the fun of bashing black people. And I'm not sure if you've heard of the site or not, but have you noticed, just in general, any sort of trend like that with, some non-white people?
Well, I think that there is, all sorts of racism out there. And, in my career, I, cut my teeth really on organizing opposition to white supremacist hate groups. So these groups that I first started organizing against were vigilante groups who, use violence in order to terrorize people of color, and in particular African Americans. There's a particularly, devastating history of that kind of terrorism directed at African Americans. The ideas that they express are certainly seem to be becoming more popular lately. In fact, I wrote a entry in my blog just a couple of days ago called "The Trouble with Nazis, White Supremacists, and Other Assorted Extremists," because it appears to me as though that kind of thinking, that sort of overt white supremacy, is coming back. So while on the one hand people say we live in a post-racial time, and there definitely seems to be a sort of colorblind racism that is prevalent right now, I also think that there is an uptick in more overt expressions of racism and white supremacy, and resurgence of neo-Nazism and patriot groups and other kinds of groups that organize explicitly around the idea that white people are superior to people of color.
Oh, I agree with that. I was just wondering if you had seen, and I do see that, and I definitely see that, and I think those serve as a perfect reminder, white over non-white. But what I see forming is kind of a middle ground of white supremacy, where white people, the white people who practice white supremacy, will kind of form an uneasy alliance with other people of color against black people. And I was wondering if you had seen any of that type of activity in general. Yeah.
Well, what I have seen quite a bit of, in particular because so much of my work focuses on Asian Americans, is this kind of growing popularity of Asian American stereotype as the model minority. And I think that model minority stereotype tends to function in the way that you just described, of potentially forming an alliance between Asian Americans and white people around the notion that Asian Americans are somehow exceptional, and that our status as an exceptional people really is used to manipulate people, white people in particular, into the belief that if one group of racial minority people can be successful in this way, and it must not be that there is a system of racism in place, but that instead there's something wrong with other people of color. And so, of course it's a lie. It's not at all true. It also plays upon a set of ideas about Asian Americans that aren't actually true. But it does, I think, tend to, facilitate the very thing you're talking about of, promoting the potential of an alliance between Asian Americans and white people. I think that Asian Americans in that, dynamic are basically being whitened. Of course, we remain who we are, but who we're whitened for are white people. In the eyes of white people, we appear to be, allies.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely think, and I'm saying I see it as a kind of uneasy alliance. I see white people reluctantly doing this, and I don't see, I see some non-white people taking that bait. Some don't. This is why we have you on the program. And I guess before I get to Vic, I wanted to know if you have read a blog, because black male who blogs in the blogosphere has done a very good job of illustrating this. And I can send you the link, actually, but it is, his name is Abagon, and he wrote a excellent piece on what he dubbed the Three Bears effect, where you have Asians who are the polar opposite of black people, which means they're tolerant to white people, but they're still deficient in some manner. And then you have white people who are just right in the middle. So he labeled it the Three Bears Effect. I thought it was an excellent piece. So if you haven't read that, I can send you a link.
Yeah, I would actually very much appreciate that. I think there's definitely a kind of racial bribe being extended to Asian Americans, that by being exceptionalized in this way as a model minority, it really invites us to ally ourselves with white people, because the flip side of allying ourselves to white people, the option is that we would ally ourselves with people who are being horribly persecuted, and basically invite that persecution upon ourselves. So it's a kind of manipulation of Asian Americans in the hopes of preventing, I think, a new majority to emerge as the demographics of the United States change. I think a similar kind of racial bribe is being extended to Latino immigrants, or at least to Latinos in the United States, by persecuting undocumented Latinos in the United States and calling them illegal, and threatening them in the way that so many of our state and local governments have. We are, basically playing this game of the good immigrant versus the bad immigrant, with good immigrants being actively recruited at this point by the Republican Party in the hopes that the Republicans can exploit the trend toward cultural conservatism among Latinos and get them to join in forming a new Republican majority. So, these kinds of bribes get extended all the time, and they've been part of the whole history of the United States, where different white ethnic groups have, been raced as people of color at different points in time in our history, but then are whitened in order to maintain white dominance.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I would point out before Vic, we had any other questions.
Oh, okay.
I've seen this being done with black people too, particularly around the legal immigrant issue.
Mm-hmm.
White people will throw around that buzzword. We're all Americans, right? We want to keep these people out. So, I've seen the racial dynamic being. It's a bit more confusing, I think, than it used to be. It's a jumble sometimes, and it seems that different racial groups take on different roles at different times.
But there definitely seems to be kind of a privilege game that gets played, right? A privilege, as in white privilege, is something that, always has a downside. You can't have privilege without excluding other people. It's the way it works. And privilege is always extended by people who have power. When I worked, in communities, I traveled around the country doing education on these issues. I would often understand this dynamic by putting a chart up on the wall and having folks help me build it. And if you can envision it, it's just drawing a line down a chalkboard or a piece of butcher paper, and inviting people to tell me who they think of as having privilege. And we would list off all the privileged groups: men as opposed to women, white people as opposed to people of color, et cetera, all the way down the line. And then we'd look at that chart and ask ourselves, if you put it, 9/10 of the people are on the side with less privilege, why is it that 1/10 can dominate everyone? And then we'd look at the various different groups and ask ourselves the question, well, are all white people male and, Christian and able-bodied and young and, all of these different things that constitute privilege? Well, they're not, right? And are all men white? No, of course they're not. But those privileges that accrue to our male identity or our status or the status of white people, etc., those things tend to divide us from one another, so that the 9/10 of us who are really not part of that, top 10% who rule the world, are extending these kinds of bribes in the form of privileges in order to keep us from cooperating with one another. And I think that we see that dynamic playing itself out all of the time. With the Republicans' Party appeal, for example, to homophobia, or the Republicans' Party appeal to sexism. that these attempts to divide people who might oppose their agenda are, really bribes, right? They're the extension of privileges to people who aren't targeted in that way, and who might decide to ally themselves with these elite forces in order to avoid being persecuted in the way that some people they see are being persecuted.
Interesting. D-Train, were you done? Or?
Yes, sir, I was.
Okay. I would just point out, or I would like to comment that with the term racial bribe, I think that I'm not sure if it's, I don't know, think about like the accuracy of it, because it's less of a bribe and it's more just mistreatment of one group, and I guess the fulcrum of white supremacy, it's anti-black racism, and I do know that I do see the so-called buffer group of people, of non-black, non-white people, definitely used at times, and I do agree, and I do think that was a good point by D-Train, just that you see a lot of this with black people. So I think it really falls into place where you write in your article where you say that the racial arrangement in the U.S. is ever-changing, and that there is no bottom. And I guess I would ask, have you had any backlash from the Asian community about, or just about addressing black or anti-black racism instead of
times that's been a little bit of pushback. Mm-hmm. Some people, the issue, one of the issues facing Asian Americans is how invisible we are. We rarely appear in media, and we aren't really counted much in politics. When you hear all these kind of horse race politics commentators talking about the presidential election, for example, Asian Americans aren't often talked about as a consequential constituency. And so when someone like me becomes visible in a community working on issues of racial justice, I think there's a certain amount of resentment that can get directed at me, or has been directed at me, because I'm not always focused on the specific issues that matter to Asian Americans. But, I didn't come to this work originally because I saw racism directed against African Americans. I came to this work originally because of the kind of racism that I grew up in, and the history of racism directed against my own community. And so I really came to this work that I've done, working on things like the prison industrial complex or against white supremacist hate groups and the Klan, because I learned as I was involved in racial justice that it was strategic to focus on those particular issues, because as we've discussed, that anti-black racism appears to be the fulcrum of white supremacy. And so it was really a strategic decision on my part to focus on issues that many would say primarily affect African Americans. I actually think our liberation is tied together, and so I focused on those issues with that in mind. But there has been a certain amount of pushback. The other, I think, thing that I've gotten is, this kind of exceptionalizing thing that people say, well, I rarely run into anyone like you. And, I think that, I want to push back on that. I think that Asian Americans are actually everywhere in racial justice. Asian Americans are leaders in the immigrant rights movement. In my work in criminal justice reform, I have worked with many Asian Americans. And, we are active in a variety of different issues and causes that affect all kinds of people of color. And so, I don't think of myself either as a person who has internalized racism and decided that I'm abandoning my people, nor do I think of myself as some sort of exception in my decision to focus on issues of racism in the way I have. I think that I've perhaps been more visible than some people over the years that I've done this work, but I'm by no means an exception.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've seen, people are people. I've seen white people in all different ends of, not one particular group, but I've seen white people in all different ends on their level of confusion or their level of complicity with white supremacy.
Absolutely.
So I don't try to differentiate between different groups of non-white people when it comes down to that. I did have one question, though. I think you consistently said the word racial justice. So I guess my preliminary question would be, what do you mean when you say race or racial?
Well, I think race and racial are really confusing terms to a lot of people, I think, because race is an illusion, right? It's not a real thing. It's not based in nature. It's not based in culture. It's not based in science. All that racial science came long after racism was used to justify race slavery and the American Indian Wars. Racism is really more of a folk belief that was turned into a political system by people who wanted to exploit the resources on this continent and make money. So the original settlers on this continent really didn't have all of that they needed in the way of skills and ideas to be able to successfully launch a civilization on this continent. And they stood, they faced the resistance, of course, of native people who they were attempting to push off their land. And so in order to justify what they needed to do in order to secure those resources and push Native Americans off their land, and in order to create a system that would allow them to exploit African immigrants who appeared to have the skills and knowledge necessary to build the communities and to till the land that they wanted to exploit, they came up with this system. So, racism is really a political system, and it's based on an illusion. But while it's based on an illusion, that race also has power and meaning. The history of it over the hundreds of years since racism became the primary way we understand we organize people here in America has made race into a very real thing. So while on the one hand it's super apparent to me because as an Asian American I know that there is no Asian American race. There are many Asian ethnic minorities that have been just glommed together once they get to the United States and called Asian. But Asian Americans themselves, for the most part, don't identify as powerfully as Asian Americans as they do by their ethnic groups. And so, it is just this sort of made-up category. But it has been given political power and meaning. Our Constitution reflects racial bias. The system of governance that we live in reflects racial bias. The laws that we live with reflect racial bias. Our economy is certainly structured along lines of racial bias. And so all of those things have given race and racism and racial, those words powerful meaning and, and made them into something very real that we have to live with.
Yes, sir. I definitely agree with you. I think that race is a political construct.
That's right.
Built by people who say that they are white. And, if you substitute white for better, you pretty much have synonyms. I guess what I wanted to add, so my real question, because that was a preliminary question, is when you say racial justice, do you think that could be an oxymoron and that could be something that really doesn't make any sense?
It could be an oxymoron. This is a question that I think people in the racial justice movement, because there is a movement of people who call themselves racial justice advocates, that this is a discussion we have a lot of, right? Is the goal really to get people to recognize the way in which they are racialized and the way in which they're oppressed by race, primarily, or is that simply a step toward living in a race-free society? And if it's a step in that direction, where we defang racism and we take the power away from these categories of race, then how do you get there as long as you keep talking about race, right? So it is a bit of a, it's a quandary. It's a quandary and a struggle.
For sure.
I use the term racial justice primarily because most of my colleagues use that term. It's a way for a community of people who are concerned about the human rights of people of color to identify with one another. And there have been a lot of other kinds of terms applied to people who do this work. And I think that specifically people in the field choose to use the word justice because it has a much more complex meaning than, say, equality, for example. And so some of these words have been carefully chosen, but they still nonetheless are loaded because we, of course, live in a racist society. There's just no way around it.
For sure, sure. Vic, did you have any? Did you want to follow up?
Yes. Actually, I think it's great. I think there's just a lot of constructive information in on your blog, and especially on this Fulcrum piece, especially speaking about slavery and how instrumental it is on the the structure of this country currently and the world really currently. And I guess I would ask you: are you familiar with the so-called coolie trade in the West Indies with bringing Asian slaves to the Caribbean and trading them?
Yeah, I have some knowledge of it, and I'm actually teaching myself about it right now. I'm reading a book called Coolies and Cane by an Asian American studies professor at the University of Washington named Moon-Ho Jung, because I recognize that that's an important gap in my understanding of racial history. And so I am learning about it. I also, as more background, grew up in Hawaii. So I was born on the island of Oahu in a rural plantation town that still, at the time when I was living there, the economic engine of that town was sugar. And so, we raised and harvested and processed sugar in that community. And so I know something about that sort of plantation economy and about that aspect of the coolie trade. I've worked in the cane fields. I've done quite a bit of that sort of agricultural work in cane and pineapple, and grew up with the smell of the sugar factory and with the burning of the cane and when the cane fields would be lit on fire, having to kind of watch over your back fence to make sure your house doesn't burn down. So I have that sort of personal experience with it.
Wow. Moon-Ho Jung. I'll have to contact him because we've been trying to get somebody on forever.
He's a really interesting person, very articulate, and really a kind of a leader, I think, in helping to, educate us all about the coolie trade and about American empire and about the ways in which all of these things interact. It's really challenged me to try to start to think beyond just the sort of domestic dimensions of racism and to think about how American empire plays this race game internationally.
Oh, definitely. We actually had Dr. Siraj Singh. He is a medical doctor who is a United States resident. He may be a citizen, but he is in India right now. And we were discussing with him towards the end of the program about how the U.S. is trying to bully India in how India deals with Iran and how they trade with Iran. And it definitely all areas of people activity.
There is definitely things going on.
You said there was echo?
I said there's definitely some serious bullying going on there. And, I think that in terms of the sort of international dimensions of racism, that one of the things that we're facing now is Islamophobia, specifically directed against South Asians and Middle Easterners and the Arab world. That Islamophobia, which is basically the fear and loathing of Muslims, has become a really powerful driver of U.S. foreign policy, and something we should all be looking out for, especially since 9/11. The persecution of Muslims in this country has become a horrible problem, and the way that the fear and loathing of Muslims has been used to drive U.S. foreign policy has become a tremendous problem for us, and certainly for the Muslim world.
Absolutely. It's very unfortunate. I guess I would ask, do you currently see a I guess in I want to ask this question first. It says on that I see the article about the LGBTQ building the leadership and power of the LGBT youth of color, and I would just ask, have you seen in the what are I guess your thoughts on both movements, and do you think that how do you think that they interact, and also since we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, do you see any semblance of racism, white supremacy in these movements?
Well, I am a gay person. I have been an employee of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, which is the oldest national civil rights organization addressing issues of concern to gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people. In the early 90s, I did that work. And that work for me was an extension of work I had already been doing to oppose the religious right. And, when I went to work for the task force as a person of color, I went there with a racial justice agenda. I really wanted to see if it was possible to move these national institutions and that national movement, which at the time seemed to have a lot of momentum, and I think still has quite a bit of momentum, on the side of racial equity. And, I had some success in doing that, and I also faced some failures. Where I had success was in making links between these attacks on the part of religious right-wing cultural warriors on the GLBT community and the attacks on the part of those same people against people of color and women. And that understanding that we were all being targeted and faced a common enemy did move people to start to address issues of race more substantively, at least in the organization I was involved in and in that part of that movement. But, I've also seen a lot of racism in the white LGBT community. I think it's simply, a reflection of what happens in the greater society. And particularly when you have a group of people who have been persecuted and marginalized, small privileges to loom larger in one's life when you face persecution of that sort. And so I think sometimes that racism can get somewhat magnified. But, I would say that generally the dynamics reflect the broader dynamics in the culture.
Yes, I think it just the racism in it just represents the conditioning of white people to mistreat non-whites in some way, shape, or form. But I guess I would ask you just to go more in depth about racism in just in general. Do you see a lot of racism in the LGBT community in general from white people?
Well, I've certainly experienced it. And, I think that people of color who are in the LGBT community often get put in this odd, quandary, right? We get stuck in the middle. We are rooted in communities that are in communities of color. That's where our experience comes from. And as with people of color generally, I can say for myself that growing up in a community of color, I grew up in a community that was almost entirely made up of Asians and Pacific Islanders. There were very few white people in my community, and my community had suffered from a history of terrible racism. And so we were almost militantly brown. We were united across ethnicities by our identity as brown people, and certainly were distrustful of white people because our very positive. So as a gay person, I was in the position of having to choose between communities because of the homophobia I grew up with. And so, I think it kind of happens on both sides. And certainly in the LGBT community, there is as much racism as there is anywhere else, and white people within that community are as racist as white people are generally. I think that there are instances in which that racism can be magnified by the sort of smallness of the community and by the fact that LGBT people are persecuted, and persecuted people tend to cling to their privileges a little more tightly. But, I would say, like I said before, that it does pretty much mirror what I've experienced in society in general, which is that in society in general, white people, unless they take a critical view of whiteness and understand the complexities of racism and choose a side, basically function as race traders, as one of my friends likes to say, who is a white anti-racist advocate. They tend generally to reflect the same kind of biases that of white people generally. And I do think that there's a real stake that white LGBT people have in fighting racism, and I do consider it an important part of my work to promote that mindset among LGBT people generally. My sense of what's happening now with these homophobic assaults against LGBT community, the kind of thing that we saw, for example, in North Carolina with Amendment 1 that banned same-sex unions, or same-sex, not just same-sex marriages, but same-sex unions, and actually domestic partnerships among heterosexuals and a variety of other things. But what gave it that force was homophobia. Is attacks on the part of groups that have a broader agenda, and that broader agenda does include attacking the rights of people of color. And they're doing it through ballot measures in many of these states. And, by using the ballot measure process to try to institutionalize bigotry, they're essentially putting a group of minority groups' rights up for a vote. And I believe that's always an incredibly dangerous thing to do. It basically plays with this idea that rights can be meted out by popularity contests, so that at any given time, if any group is despised or marginalized by the majority, that their rights can be taken away by a popular vote. And I think that whenever that's possible, everyone is in jeopardy. And so I think that, sometimes these things like homophobia tend to cloud our vision and make it difficult for us to see how these attacks make everyone vulnerable. And I think it's super important for people to keep their eyes open and recognize that whatever they feel about LGBT people, and everyone has the right to feel the way that they want to feel, taking political action to institutionalize those beliefs in state or federal constitution is a very, very dangerous precedent.
Okay. You went into, I guess, what I directly wanted to get into. Do you see any attempt, especially with the amendment in North Carolina that was recently passed, do you see any attempt by the mass media to blame black people in particular for being extremely homophobic or what have you? Do you see any attempt, and how much validity do you think that has?
Yeah, I think that, there is a certain kind of blame game that gets played. It was particularly apparent in the California case, right? When the, proposition that ended same-sex marriage in California was passed, and some of the post-election polling revealed that African Americans had voted in significant numbers in support of that anti-LGBT proposition. But, what we need to keep our eyes on here is that the proposition didn't require the support of African Americans to pass. It passed. And the majority of people who passed it were white people. There's no doubt about that. So, it's really, isolating one statistic and using it in order to try to play communities off of one another. The reality is that, statistically speaking, African Americans are not significantly more likely to vote for anti-LGBT measures than anybody else. And that really the most determining factor of how one will vote on such issues is how one identifies in terms of religion. And so, to the extent that certain communities tend to be more churched, they may be more likely to vote in favor of anti-LGBT legislation or anti-LGBT ballot measures. But race is not really the determining factor here. It's really more belief, right? And so I think it's just dangerous to start to say that that any given racial or ethnic community is more likely to be homophobic, because it's really not our race or ethnicity that determines that we'll be more homophobic. It's really our affiliation with different kinds of institutions that may or may not have homophobic beliefs.
Yeah, I've seen. I actually read an article the other day. I think it was in the New York Times, and I wish I had it up. Laptop just lost juice, but anyway, it was saying it was pointing out black people being responsible, for all this, I guess homophobic activity, and what they were saying is they used numbers to quote unquote prove it, but it was like 45% of black people oppose gay marriage, and 39% or white people oppose gay marriage. And then it went on to say that black people have I can't remember the naming they used or the language they used, but it was like they have it was something along, they've had a vicious history of, pretty much oppressing gay people, and I just thought this couldn't be further from the truth. And, I mean, the statistics that they gave were almost within the margin of error. So if anybody, thought critically about it.
Yeah, I think the key number to focus on there, if they're saying 45% of African Americans are opposed, is that 55% of African Americans are for, right? I mean, I wish that we would look at the glass as half full as opposed to half empty. But, in terms of just, calling out African Americans as being particularly homophobic, I would say that, just to be really frank, is just BS, right? It is really just not an accurate representation. If you look at white people as a group, it depends on who you're talking about, right? If you're talking about Southern Baptists, well, they're awfully homophobic. If you're talking about the vast majority of members of the American Family Association, which is a religious right-wing institution, then you're talking about white people. And these are the kinds of institutions that have been developing the politics of these ballot measures and legislative attacks, and have been promoting them, and in some cases even funding them, right? And so, I would look at who the leadership is in the movement to try to criminalize and take rights away from LGBT people, and ask ourselves, who are those people? Those people, for the most part, are white people, right? I also think that there's a really important difference between, the Christian traditions that exist within many white communities and the traditions that exist in many communities of color. There's a really profound difference, right? Because whether or not people are homophobic, we put that to one side. The basic structure of the theology in communities of color tends to be more liberatory, right? Whereas the traditions within white communities tend to be more repressive. I'm sure that people are going to think that's a really controversial statement, but I believe it to be true. And, I think that we need to look at those things. We don't see these ballot measures being sponsored by African American leaders for the most part. We don't see them being sponsored or supported for the most part by African American institutions. We see them being sponsored by white people and supported by white institutions. and white institutions who also have a much broader agenda that includes taking rights away from people of color.
Very interesting. Vic, did you have anything?
Very interesting indeed. I guess I would just ask your thoughts on President Obama and his, his decision to, him coming out about his thoughts on changing legislation for same-sex marriage. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, when it happened, I have to admit that I did roll my eyes just a little bit, because I do know that he first stated his support for same-sex marriages in 1996 when he was an Illinois state senator, and so it felt like an awfully political move to me. But on the other hand, I have to say it did take great courage. It's a tremendous political risk to take in a presidential election year when one's approval ratings are not that high and when the economy, while improving, is still doing pretty badly. And where, a large sector of the electorate, I think wrongly, blames the president for the sorry state of our economy. And so, I thought it was a pretty brave move on his part to, stake out that position. I think many say it's a cynical move to raise money, but, it's just really not the case that LGBT people are rich enough or large enough in number to really even begin to compete with the kind of donations that the Republican candidate for president will get from major corporations and from the wealthiest people, the one percenters. LGBT people will certainly provide significant support for the Democratic candidate for President Obama in this race, because President Obama in this race is our only ally. But I also believe that it's really not a move motivated primarily by fundraising. I rolled my eyes just a little bit, but it also got a kind of a tear and a cheer from me. I have to say that as a person who is I just turned 50. I turned 50 on May 7th, and so I'm a child of the 60s, right? I could never have imagined that by age 50, I would see an American president actually coming out and supporting same-sex marriage. It's the touchiest of touchy issues in the LGBT debate. And so it was a really big moment, I think. And, it was the culmination for me of many, many years, decades, of working on this issue and working on it, and as a result of my work on it, facing, incredible backlash, both personally and in terms of, my career in life, just in every dimension of my life. Being an out and open advocate of LGBT rights has put me in danger, has caused me to have to define my life in a certain kind of way. For many years I never had identification that named my actual home address on it, because I would occasionally get stalked, my home was vandalized. These are all the kinds of things that people have faced over the course of this history of struggle to this moment. And so for this president to step up at this time and to say that, it really did mean a great deal. And, I have to say that, a little bit of political manipulation perhaps, but nonetheless, I applaud it.
I know we said an hour, and we're at about the 55-minute mark. So I did want to get into this part of the discussion and I don't know what your thoughts will be about this, since you aren't heterosexual, but I think a good part, a significant part that I've noticed of white supremacy, racism, seems to be the sexual marginalization of both Asian males and black females. And I wanted to know if you had noticed any of this, and I had mentioned this because of one, there's a statistic that 40% of Asian women marry white men, and two, just the stereotypes associated with Asian males, and three, the stereotypes associated with black females. So I think there's a lot of, I think this is a significant portion of white supremacy, and I just wanted to know your thoughts on the sexual marginalization, particularly of Asian males, and if you had any thoughts about black females.
Well, I definitely am aware of the way in which Asian males tend to be emasculated by the kinds of stereotypes that we face. And I think those emasculating stereotypes are, tend to contribute to these kinds of trends that, you mentioned of, 40% of Asian women marrying or partnering with white males. I think that, there is also the way that Asian American or Asian women in general have been sexualized, making them particularly attractive partners to. I'm not trying to say that every time you see an interracial couple, a white and Asian interracial couple, that the basis of their attraction is fetish. But Asian American women have been fetishized in a particular kind of way. And, both the fetishization of Asian American women, the sexualization of Asian American women, and the emasculation of Asian American men, I think, serve to objectify Asians and to sort of minimize us. And so, I think there's definitely something there. I don't know as much about it as I probably should, but I definitely know I definitely have noticed that trend. And, I think it's reflected a lot in the kinds of things that you, see in media and the kinds of ways that you see Asian men marginalized. I think it's a very real part of, how white supremacy works. The interesting thing to me always about white supremacy is that for, as much as it tends to objectify people of color and tends to humiliate us in various ways, that its power also comes from the way that white people have been glommed together as a group across ethnicities and sort of made into this sort of monolith, right? And normalized. So, white identity is just considered the neutral or the normal, both in terms of, how we are understood sexually, it's how we are understood in, every dimension of our lives. And, it is a really sad part of this whole system of racism. I think that I could be wrong about this, but I believe it was Derek Bell, who's someone I have long admired, who said something along the lines of, that slavery was an attempt on the part of white people to completely dehumanize black people, but failed and had the opposite effect. And, I'm a real believer in that statement, and I think that it extends to the many other ways in which racism expresses itself, that all of these, kind of racist stereotypes and tropes are meant to dehumanize people of color, but really have the opposite effect and tend to dehumanize white people. It takes away their ability to see people as people, to understand what it means to be a human being fully, and to therefore create public policy to address the diverse needs of people as though all of those needs are important and connected, right? When in fact they are. All of us are tied together, and as long as we continue to make public policy that tends to marginalize or minimize the needs of some people on behalf of other people, we don't have a sustainable system in place. And so, I would say that the liberation of all of us is contingent upon the liberation of the some of us who have suffered from racism for so long, and that we have to somehow make that argument to the white majority, that their liberation is tied to us. I think one of the great things we have to, on our side, it's a sad reality of life, but one of the great things we have on our side is that white privilege has a real material value to it, right? There are financial consequences to white privilege. People think of white privilege as something that's rooted in attitudes, but it is also something that has a real monetary value. And but that monetary value of white privilege isn't evenly distributed among white people. Most of it accumulates at the top, right? Most of it accumulates among the 1%. So white people also suffer from financial vulnerability and even poverty. And in order for them to be able to address it, they need to recognize, as I think we do, the incredibly powerful role that racism plays in making sure that that kind of inequality stays in place, and make an appeal to them to join in our cause to address this inequity in order to be able to create a more sustainable and fair system for everybody.
A more fair system. That word fair. I guess I would. Sorry. Also, there was I guess I would ask, are you familiar with the, there was just an article and a series of articles a few months ago about, since you were speaking about the LGBTQ community, there was an article about racism in this community against Asians specifically, especially on online dating sites, that were saying that they just had they would actually try to just put down and further emasculate Asian men sexually, and I mean just in general, and would say no Asians allowed, et cetera, and it just seems like it would be a reflection of, like you said, the culture at large. Would you say you have seen that yourself?
Yeah, I've witnessed this, and I understand that there's this problem. I do think that it is reflected in the culture at large. That when you look at the way that white men have sexualized and fetishized Asian women, when you look at heterosexual dating sites, white men seeking Asian women, and you look at the kind of sexual trafficking that's happening, that where Asian women are marketed as mail order brides and whatnot, there is a parallel in the straight world to what we see happening in the gay world. And so I think it is really just a reflection of how bad things are in general, in terms of this, fetishization and sexual objectification of Asians.
Interesting. Interesting. D-Train?
Do we have any callers on the line?
Yes, and also I'll, if you would like to call in really quickly for a question for our guests, the number is 917-889-2965. That is 917-889-2965. I guess the caller, last four digits, 7012. Your line is open. Do you have any questions for our guest?
Greetings. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah, I didn't have any questions at the moment. But thanks for the show, and thank you, guests, for coming on.
Thank you for listening.
I used to do a radio show a long time ago, and I remember that the most difficult part of it is managing the call-in section.
Yes.
I always feared the call-in section, the potential of dead air,
I know. It happens.
Yeah.
D-Train?
Definitely. All right. I'm not sure I had anything else, and like I said, I know we agreed to an hour, Mr. Nakagawa, so I would like to be respectful of your time.
I really appreciate this opportunity and the forum you've created. I know, as I said, I did a radio show in the past, and so I know how much work it takes to put it all together. I remember it was just a marathon every week to try to put all of the material together for just a monthly radio show, but, we put ourselves on a weekly deadline to make sure we would have material. And so I do really appreciate your doing this, and think it's a great thing that this forum exists. So thanks a lot for having me on it.
Thank you, Mr. Nakagawa.
Thank you.
Send me archives too, definitely, and I will. I'll send you the link from Abagond about the Three Bears effect as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
All right. Good night.
Reckless 2.0. D-Train. So I think it was a constructive broadcast. Definitely, that was Mr. Nakagawa.
Oh yeah, I definitely think he had a lot of good information.
Don't forget,
I try not to quibble with non-white people, so
Of course, here for exactly. Once I heard, I was not going to attempt to be combative, and it was constructive. Just RaceFiles.wordpress.com to go to his blog. Blackness is the Fulcrum. Definitely a very constructive article. It sounds very, to me anyway, to be accurately attempting to address racism, white supremacy.
Yeah, definitely. And he gave us a potential guest who wrote about the coolie trade. So
oh yes, that coolie trade.
Trying to contact that guest. White people trifling worldwide. Trifling worldwide.
So, did you know that he was he's so-called homosexual?
Well, I had suspicion that he was because he was in a gay rights advocacy group, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. And so I think the way you asked the question was the best way of finding out.
Yeah,
like I said, he had a lot of constructive information. So
definitely, he was also honest about the racism, white supremacy in that community, showing that that's something that it doesn't matter. Being white is definitely what is the main classification, the main thing, the main problem, the biggest problem, and I think that that there's no escape. No escape. You're just in it. It's a system.
Yeah, you can be emasculated and be gay and still be mistreated because you're not white. Even if you're an Asian buffer.
I know. Getting racial bribes.
This is so ridiculous. It is ridiculous. Just, replace white supremacy with this. It's ridiculous.
It's racist. It just is. But it's true, and I think that him focusing on him focusing on anti-black racism, I know it has some pushback because from a lot of people for a lot of different reasons, but I do think it's constructive, and it's definitely
it has some pushback because of anti-black racism. Him talking about anti-black racism has pushback because of anti-black racism.
Exactly. He's getting pushback for that's the reason. And I just think it was interesting that I have this dictionary from 1940, and I looked up the word nigger, and I don't have it at hand. I'll go get it, but I believe one of the definitions in there was a tool. It was some type of tool, a big steel tool that is used for something. And I just thought that was just very interesting that was the definition at one point in time, a definition for nigger. And
you said a tool, Tool?
Yes, tool.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Kevorkian machines.
Oh yes. I'm going to find it. I'm going to find my dictionary at some point and make sure I find out the exact definition, because I did think that that's black people use as tools, as and just a way to get ahead, an object.
Very interesting. I'm sorry. Mr. Nakagawa is actually, I believe he's scheduled to be on Cree's show as well. I'm not sure when, but I'm pretty sure that is true. And that is blogtalkradio.com/create. Go and listen to Counter Racist Evolving Engineers program.
Absolutely, very, I believe, constructive dialogue and just a constructive program. And I guess we can go to the phone lines. I guess I'll see that Cree's on. I'll open her line. Cree, are you there? Your line is open. I guess they're not there. Not going to speak for the moment, but if you have anything to say, you can definitely raise your hand. Definitely in the bonus hour now. But I also wanted to. I didn't want to specifically address the issue of the conflation of. I think it kind of skirted around it, the conflation of, homosexuality and racism, white supremacy, specifically racism, white supremacy towards black people, and showing that he kind of did mention that both movements have their issues, have their issues, and they should band together, and there's a big role. A big role with the LGBTQ movement, and I just he definitely had that conflation thing going. I definitely remember I showed you earlier, D-Train, that it was on Facebook, and it was and someone posted a picture where it said, "Look how stupid you will look in 40 years." That was the caption, and on the top they had, but they had the posters of saying, just from the civil rights.
Wasn't it the Little Rock Nine where they had people?
The civil rights, the civil rights era with niggers go home, et cetera, and then they had underneath another picture of saying marriages, people today with the anti-gay marriage protests with signs saying marriages between man and a woman, et cetera, and I just see that as just complete that going viral, unquote, and being on social media and really just really, it's just like I see like a big influx of promotion of this since this announcement. It's been even more prevalent. I can't even go to a video game website without someone talking about this game Mass Effect and how they kept their character in the closet for a certain amount of time, and then they finally fell in love with another man. And it's just like I can't even play video, can't even be non-constructive and read about video games, and I have to have this in my face.
Yeah, I would go even a step further than conflation. And now I'm not saying this of Mr. Nakagawa, but I'm saying that it's a racist false equivalency. Pretty much, it's a racist false equivalency. You're comparing I mean, whoever drafted this picture of comparing the civil rights movement to gay people getting married, it's just not the same thing. And I wish people would stop pretending it is. Whatever your views are on the issue at hand, whether you're for civil unions or marriages or whatever the issue is at hand, you have to admit, this is a racist false equivalency. And like I said, its false equivalency is then again magnified because, you're scapegoating black people for being particularly quote unquote homophobic.
Exactly.
So you're magnifying that equivalency, that false equivalency. So yeah, I did see him kind of skirt around that, but he did make clear, and I will put this out there too. He did make clear, that when he was talking about white gay people, he pretty much said, these are still white people here, like So to me, it seemed like he was primarily focused on, like Mr. Cleo Monazo, gay people of color, I guess. Oh, man.
Yeah.
Just replace white supremacy with justice, man.
Please.
Yeah.
Mm-mm-mm.
Yep. And at least he was a bit, because what I see with this white gay agenda is that it doesn't seem like they want people to have independent thought about this topic. They just want you to accept it and not think about it on your own. And I think Mr. Nakagawa said, you should, everybody is entitled to their own opinion. And, I just think right now we're in a climate where it doesn't seem that people are entitled to their opinion, especially black people are entitled to their opinion about what I would call, a homosexual push. But I could be wrong.
Do you think black people are entitled to their opinion on racism and white supremacy?
VGQ, man. VGQ.
Yes.
Victims guaranteed qualification. All non-white people. Qualified whatever views they have. Even Clarence Thomas, unfortunately.
He's a victim. What are you going to do?
ABC. So did you have any other thoughts on that?
I just thought that his organization that he's a part of definitely seems like it's attempting constructive things, and that I just think it's constructive to have some non-black, non-white people in this, showing that it's the issue is it isn't black and white. It isn't just black and white. It's white and non-white, and I think that just reinforced him being an advocate for both anti-Asian white supremacy and anti-black white supremacy. I think that's a good thing and a constructive attempt.
Mm. And I always wanted to ask that question about what exactly a think tank is. Is a think? And I think he did a pretty. I would like to ask a white person, really. What is a think tank? Do you think of a military vehicle, or do you think of an aquarium? Because the term has to come from somewhere. I don't know if he did an adequate job of explaining it, but he seemed to try. So.
Well, what do you think?
I think, military vehicle. I think. And, before Gus had brought it up on one of his programs, I always thought of it as like an aquarium, a think tank, where you have a a container where thoughts go into, and that's what I always thought of when the term think tank was used. And it seems to be closer to what Mr. Nakagawa believes as well. But I think it makes more sense, especially when you start talking about quote-unquote conservative think tanks. It makes a lot more sense when you substitute the military apparatus rather than just a container or aquarium. What were your thoughts?
I can agree with that. I certainly, I think that it would be most appropriate, like you said, to have, with a conservative think tank and with and just to, in general, empower the words. I would say that, thinking that of an actual tank, it's definitely most accurate. But of course, I usually, and originally you think. When I hear think tank, I think of people in scuba suits in a tank talking. I don't know why, but that's it's the way I think. But I certainly understand, and I certainly can agree with that.
Interesting. Well, I guess what do we have coming down the pipe? I know that we tried to contact the suspected racist who authored Stuff White People Do.
Oh yes, Mr. Macon D. I believe. I'm not sure, but I believe way early in some of the early cows, Gus addressed him for I guess pulling a Tim Wise and just using the cows as a way to just glean ideas off of and take credit for. So definitely he did Stuff White People Do. It's a blog, and he went on hiatus, I believe, in July of 2010, and hasn't
not returned.
Yes, he just was like, oh, I want to go back to being white. So
maybe other white people bodied him or something. And also, just for listeners' information, we are going to be attempting to get a lot more explicitly racist white people on the program.
Yes. Yes.
And more people with largely anti-black views, whether they are black or non-black. We're definitely going to attempt to expose the problem and agents of the problem.
I think. I certainly think we've had some pretty dedicated racist white supremacists on our program. However, there's Mr. Nigger and others who are just still
on the team.
With a typically to practice some deception. So I think the more overt, you could definitely get a lot of information from overt racist white supremacists listening to their views. So I think it's important to just listen and just listen.
Yeah, I think it's important because I believe that you're going to have. I believe that you're going to have most white people that you encounter. They'll skew towards deception, but underneath all of the deception, what they really are is that overt racist white supremacist. So I think bringing people who aren't shy about being racist on the program is definitely a good thing to do, because then you can understand what you're dealing with. Sometimes when there's a lot of deception, you can get confused on what you're actually dealing with. So yeah, I think that in itself is a good reason to get more overt racist on the program. And if any callers had any, I guess, any thoughts on that, then you're more than welcome to speak up. I know Creed had just recently gotten an overt racist on our program, and they had about an hour of dialogue. And he hope shows the next time. Just to make that clear, he said he was going to come back on a program and did not. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes, everybody's line is open, by the way.
Oh, I have to tell you a story. Okay,
go for it.
So, I just moved a couple of weeks ago, and ever since I moved, I've been out, playing basketball, getting exercise, riding my bike, or what have you. So anyway, I was out playing basketball. Some other black males. This may have been about maybe 5 or 6 days ago. And, we're on our way, off the court, because it's dark, nobody can see, everybody's getting hit in the head with the ball and what have you. And, as I'm walking back to my car, these enforcement officials pull up. And, I just got in my car and kept going because, they didn't say stop or anything. But, I could hear them saying, well, hey, I know you guys know you're not supposed to be out here, and stuff to that effect. And, I saw one black male who was in his vehicle get out of his vehicle and say, is there a problem, officer? This, that, and the third. So, I was going to say, well, nah, man, he ain't stop you, just keep walking. But I was like, probably not the smartest thing to do, so I just got in my car and left. 2 days later, I went back to the basketball court, and I saw the same black male, and I was like, well, man, why did you get out your car? I mean, you were already in your car. You could have just went. And he was like, oh, well, I thought the cop was going to do something, et cetera, et cetera. And he told me about this huge lecture that this cop gave a whole group of black males who were doing nothing, no criminal activity, just playing basketball, about being at the park after dusk. And mind you, as soon as dusk hit, everybody was trying to go home because nobody could see. And so, yeah, that's my story. Oh, yeah, and he made them all line up and sit down for about 30 minutes while he gathered, I guess, information that will probably be used for some sort of warrant or something later on. Sit down names and all that. So.
And what was the age range?
Most of the black males were younger. The black male that I talked to, though, I'm guessing he was about 21 or so. Most of them out there were younger, significantly younger than I was. When you go out and play ball, you're pretty much gonna run into a lot of young boys. But yeah, so.
And Kree, your line is open. But yeah, I would ask you, what do you, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on, just even the sit down itself with the enforcement officials, or what do you think? Man, I mean, they could have just simply asked these police officers, are you detaining me, or can I go home, or what? And, they said, we're detaining you. Then they could have, went through with the process. But my first thought was, I'm going to keep walking. I'm going to my car. I haven't done anything wrong. If they ask me to stop, then I'll stop. So it's compliance, but it's not. Great.
Oh, good. Sorry. I didn't want to. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying, yeah, it's compliance, but I'm not going to stop for these people. Definitely not.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I did not get a chance to listen to Mr. Nakagawa. Is that correct? Nakagawa?
Yes, ma'am.
Yep.
Okay. So I didn't get a chance, and then I was listening to on the speakers to you guys review it and talk about it because I'm working, trying to make a buck. So, I will listen to it on the download, and I'm just want to let you know I'm here. So I'm going to unplug my mic now and go back to listening to you guys.
Okay, dope. I appreciate it. Making a buck.
I know, but definitely thanks for calling in and listening.
So that was my racist story for last week, though. I mean, obviously more stuff happened, but that was pretty much the most overt that I've seen. And, like I said, I just moved on. I want to get out and exercise. And, I mean, why do I have to deal with that,
Racism, white supremacy, that's why.
Pretty much. So did you have any thoughts on Dr. Singh's appearance? And, listeners, I'm going to have to brush up that audio a bit. We ran into interference, I think 3 or 4 times. And it cut in and out for about the first 40 minutes of the program. So did you have any thoughts?
I thought it was just very, very, very constructive. And I definitely thought that I was surprised about his... I guess his level of non-confused or being that less confused, and just just hearing him talk about the caste system and things of that nature was just very, very constructive and interesting information.
Yeah, I agree. And if you should definitely, listeners, you should listen to him. If you haven't already, on Gus T. Renegade's program, he made an appearance exactly a week before we made an appearance on our program. Apparently, both us and Gus were on the grind trying to get Dr. Singh on the program. But, very useful information, very useful.
So, there was just an article, just tons of articles talking about President Obama losing votes because of his alleged stance on homosexual marriage. And I guess I would just ask you, D-Train, what were your thoughts on this, and what do you think about the subsequent reaction?
Okay, well, I think it could have been a political move, simply because I didn't see any actual legislation or any promises of legislation being put in place to back up his stated beliefs. And then number 2, it seemed to spark off this whole debate, and again, it gets back to focusing on black people being the problem, and why, black people are being oppressive, and, all this other garbage. And, quite frankly, I'm just tired of it. I won't inject my views into the whole conversation, but, I'm really just tired of this conversation. And like Mr. Nakagawa said, black people aren't the ones putting this legislation up for vote and saying, oh, well, you know, people should go vote on it. These are white people doing this. And I think the sooner people realize that white people are the ones that are really making this such a huge issue, and it's not, you know, non-white people, black people who are really concerned about this much at all, I think the better. So those are my thoughts on it. Like I said, I just think it was a political ploy by whatever white person is handling Barack Obama to get votes. And I think it was a calculated move. I don't think they're going to lose any votes from black people. I had a black female who told me the other day, and this is literally, you know, I said, you know, we were having a conversation about President Obama, and she was like, man, are you kidding me? He sings Al Green. And I was just like, whoa. And I'm like, this is all this man has to do. Black people happy. And some white person probably told him to sing that. So I mean, you know, and this is you know, who I would call, you know, a pretty intelligent person. And you know, he sings Al Green, and it's just like, man, baby minds.
I know, just dangling the keys to distract her baby minds. It's ridiculous.
Oh yeah. Oh, so that was my other racist white supremacist moment of last week. When she said that.
Wow.
Oh, and it also made me think of the quote-unquote evolution picture where they have Barack Obama depicted as a knuckle-dragging ape who eventually... you remember what portrait I'm talking? Not portrait, but picture, graphic I'm talking about, where they had him start off as an ape, and it was like Obama's evolution on gay marriage.
Oh yes. Yep. I remember that. I wish you aren't on Skype anymore, are you?
No, I'm not. I actually lost juice in my laptop a long time ago.
Ooh, because there's definitely... Did you see the Newsweek cover?
Oh, yeah. First gay president?
The first gay president with a halo? And, like, just, you know, with a halo over top of his head, and the halo is rainbow-colored. And this is on the cover of Newsweek.
Mm-hmm. And it's so ridiculous because it obviously it's a playoff of the Bill Clinton thing as well, where he was dubbed the first quote-unquote black president. So
I think it's a subconscious comparison, conflation of being black and being homosexual. Possibly. Definitely. This cover's out of control. And it's just, I don't know. I would want to know what Dr. Welsing would think about this with the halo and, you know, his head. I would just, you know, hovering above his head. Definitely would want to know what Dr. Welsing would think.
Yeah, I agree. And Dr. Watkins, Dr. Boyce Watkins, who we have been attempting to get on the program for forever and a day, he actually published an article the other day on Your Black World, which was talking about CNN's racist depiction of the so-called black church. You know, basically where CNN was saying, you know, these dumb niggas, they stupid and ignorant, and, you know, Whitey freed them from slavery 150 years ago, and now they want to go and enslave someone else. That was basically what it was saying. So on yourblackworld.com, there's a lot of information on there too. I definitely think some of the contributors to The Root and some of those other mainstream black publications aren't as confused. There's some that are, obviously, but some of those mainstream black publications that are owned by whites sometimes have some some pretty good information in them. So.
Absolutely.
I think Dr. Boyce Watkins is a start with that. I mean, I'm not praising anybody. I mean, we're still on the plantation, but he definitely has some good information, which is why we've been trying to get him on the program in several different ways.
We'll keep attempting.
Is there anything else that we want to discuss? I mean, if we don't have callers who are going to come in and participate,
not at the moment. I do think that our next program should be on deception and just in general, how deception is used and just how it's used by white people to see non-white people, and I just think that's very important. How maybe counter deception, how that could be a constructive tool or a constructive strategy. So I think maybe perhaps our next program, which should be very soon, should perhaps deal with that.
Okay, I totally agree. I think that's a good topic to start on. And also, I want to have a program where we have, I guess, maybe some people who are more confused come on, and I'll see if I can hit Facebook and get a couple of classmates and stuff like that to come on and share their views. I think that would be helpful too.
Oh, absolutely.
Because like Walking Bear always says, this does some. I mean, even though it's informative, sometimes it does kind of serve as a therapy measure, unfortunately.
People pay thousands of dollars for therapy, so that's all I'm saying. No, it's not. It could be therapy. No, really, it's just very information, and information is very important. So yeah.
Totally agree.
So I guess if there aren't any comments or questions from the callers, I guess this will be a wrap for this one.
Yes, sir. What do we used to say? Back on OG Records, DB rap.
It's a doobie rap.
Taking back.
Exactly. There's just no escape.
I agree. Alrighty, folks. And everybody be safe. Have a good night. Records 2.0 signing out.
Yes. Stay constructive.